Good morning, everyone. Feel very welcome to my presentation. Let me just introduce myself. My name is Cesar Ramirez, and I am a trademark solicitor. And this morning, I am going to give you an overview of what I do, and I have chosen a particular topic, and that's called trade dress. So, it tastes like, it smells like, and it looks like, but it's not the same thing. I'll be addressing three main points in my presentation. The first one will be what I mean by trade dress, what the subject matter is, and the definition of that. And I'll give you several examples along the course. And in my second point, I would like to talk about the different actions that we may take to stop trade dress infringement. And finally, in my third point, I'll be looking at why we actually protect trade dress and why it's actually important and relevant to the public. So, moving on to my first point, the subject matter, what trade dress is. Trade dress, briefly, is the general appearance or the visual appearance of a particular product. So, to illustrate my point, I will be looking at three different examples of trade dress. The first one will be the configuration of a product, the second one will be the shape of the product, and the third one will be the design of the product. So, moving on to my first example, the configuration of a product. Here, we've got two different products, right? Two tins of Coke. So, this is as you all know, this is a tin of Coke, right? And next to it, we've got its twin, right? And what I mean by trade dress is basically the copying or imitation of certain characteristics of an original product and used on a different product to actually make it look like the same product. In this case, for example, we've got the color, right, which is red, the graphics, the script is very similar, Coke to cola, and also the use of commonplace words. In this case, cola, Coke, Coca-Cola, and cola or classic cola. Cola is a generic word which can be used by all traders. Moving on to my second example, this concerns the shape of the product. In this case, we've got some Head and Shoulders shampoo. In this case, right, the shape of the product, the general appearance of the product has been copied. There was no reason for it because they could have chosen a completely different shape of the bottle. Nevertheless, the shape was copied, and also certain elements of the visual appearance and the size of it were copied. As you can see, for example, Head and Shoulders is very similar to Headway, right? And this combination of colours was also sort of copied on the fake product. So moving on to my third point, the design of a product. In this case, for example, cornflakes made by Kellogg's uses a very particular. Well, it's not very particular because it's mainly used by most cereals, right? Nevertheless, the sort of graphic configuration, the arrangement of the colours, and certain patterns within the design of cornflakes were copied. And at the same time, by doing that, the new product, the new entrant, is actually transferring some of the imagery or some of the commercial attraction, some of the commercial magnetism of the first product, the famous product, onto the new product. So at this point, I've looked at three different ways or three different products that have been copied and imitated in three different forms. The first one was the configuration, then the shape, and then the design of a product. So enough about the subject matter. Let's move on to my next point, which is the infringement action. And in this regard, let me just say that in order to tackle these three problems, a trademark practitioner would normally use three different sorts of action. The first one is the traditional likelihood of confusion. The second one is the new form of dilution. And the third one is unfair competition. The first one I've mentioned, confusion, is normally a bit rather limited because it does not cover instances where to prove confusion, consumer confusion, will be very difficult. As you can see, the names are different. So a case for confusion will be very difficult to prove because the name of the product, the name of the brand is not actually used. It's very intelligent. They actually use just the configuration, but not the name. And as you can see, the name of the new product is actually predominantly displayed. So instances of confusion will be dispelled. The second action, which is dilution, is a more complicated one, but suffice to say at this point that it is normally used when there is some damage, not to the public as in the form of confusion, but it's damage to the mark itself, to the brand itself, when the general in commercial magnetism of the brand will be diminished or will be damaged by the use of a similar or identical trade dress on a competitor's product, on a similar product, or an identical product. And the third action, which I believe is the best and most effective way to tackle this problem, is unfair competition. And unfair competition will provide us with a remedy if we can prove that the elements that are being copied, let me just go back a bit. If the elements that are being copied are not functional or generic, then we may have an action. In this case, for example, we could argue that this is functional and it just makes easier to handle the bottle of shampoo. And possibly you may also argue that the shape of the tin of Coke is actually functional and generic because it makes easier to drink a tin of Coke like that as opposed to, having a different shape. So if we can prove that the elements we're actually claiming protection on are not functional, then we may have redress through an action of unfair competition. So moving on to my last point, let me just say a few words about why we're interested in protecting trade dress. And at this point, there are three main interests. The first one is the investment of the trader, in this case, the owner of Coca-Cola, the Kellogg's company, and the owner of the Head and Shoulder company. They invest in not only advertising, but developing other products. And they're obviously interested in preserving this commercial magnetism, which they actually develop through advertising. The second interest, which I believe is the most important one, the keystone, is a public interest. And this is concerned with the protection of consumers. That consumers should not be confused when buying a similar product. When you go to Sainsbury's, for example, say if you're in a rush, you haven't got time to actually check the product, you may actually grab Sainsbury's Coke as opposed to Coca-Cola. So the interest over there is to protect the consumer. And the last interest is fair practices, that one trader should not actually free ride or gain an advantage over another without actually spending money, time and effort. So to summarize what we've looked at the definition of a trade dress, and to illustrate my definition, I gave you three different examples. And the second point we looked at was the three different actions that we can actually invoke to get protection. And the third one was the different interests at stake when protecting trade dress. I trust that you have got a very clear insight into what I do regarding trademark infringement actions, in particular trade dress. I am very happy to take any questions, and thank you very much for listening.